Welcome, brave souls, to a chilling journey into the depths of terror. Brace yourselves as we delve into a spine-tingling tale that will send shivers down your spine. But fear not, for you're not alone on this journey. Join us, subscribe, and hit that like button to support our channel as we uncover the darkness that lies ahead. Let the haunting begin. The silence in the house was a living thing, pressing down on me like a suffocating blanket. It had been 2 weeks since Sarah vanished, 2 weeks since the world turned into a blurry nightmare of police reports, worried phone calls, and a gnawing emptiness that seemed to hollow me out from the inside. Everywhere I looked, I saw her ghost. The chipped mug she always used for her morning tea, the worn paperback she left abandoned on the couch, the scent of her lavender perfume clinging faintly to a throw pillow. It was torture, a constant reminder of the life we once had, the life that had been ripped away in an instant. The last thing I remembered was the fight. It was stupid, a petty argument about a forgotten grocery list that escalated in that way arguments sometimes do, fueled by exhaustion and unspoken frustrations. Harsh words were exchanged, the kind that hung heavy in the air long after they were uttered. The last image of Sarah was her retreating figure storming out the back door, her face etched with hurt and anger. Guilt gnawed at me like a ravenous beast. Maybe if I hadn't been so quick to anger, so quick to blame, things would be different. Maybe if I had just apologized, shown her I cared, none of this would have happened. The thought was a relentless hammer blow in my head. Sleep offered no escape. My nights were plagued by vivid dreams of Sarah, lost and alone in the dense wilderness behind our house, the towering pines of the Olympic National Forest swallowing her whole. Every rustle of leaves in the wind, every creak of the old house, sent jolts of terror through me. One morning I woke up with a desperate resolve. The police search efforts had yielded nothing, and the silence was a deafening indictment of my inaction. I couldn't just sit here, paralyzed by guilt and fear. I had to find Sarah. I threw together a backpack, stuffing it with essentials, a first aid kit, energy bars, a tattered map of the forest trails. A crumpled piece of paper lay forgotten on the kitchen counter, a cryptic note scrawled in Sarah's hand. Whispering Pines, follow the creek. It was the final, desperate message I received before she disappeared. My stomach clenched with a mixture of dread and determination. This wasn't a walk in the park. The Olympic National Forest was a vast, unforgiving wilderness, a labyrinth of towering trees and dense undergrowth. But I wouldn't let fear stop me. For Sarah, I would face anything. With trembling hands, I grabbed a worn hiking jacket and headed outside. The crisp morning air slapped me in the face, a harsh contrast to the stuffy confinement of the house. The familiar landscape felt alien, every shadow harboring a potential threat. Steeling my nerves, I followed the well-worn path leading into the woods, the first step on a desperate journey into the heart of the unknown. The trail into the forest was a familiar one, a path Sarah and I had hiked countless times before. But this time the air thrummed with an oppressive silence, the birdsong strangely absent. The dappled sunlight filtering through the towering pines seemed to cast long, menacing shadows, transforming the once inviting woods into a scene from a grim fairy tale. With each step, the weight of the unknown pressed down heavier on my shoulders. I wasn't a seasoned outdoorsman, just a worried husband venturing into territory where I knew I didn't belong. But I pushed forward, the memory of Sarah's retreating form a beacon dragging me deeper into the green labyrinth. A flicker of movement caught my eye, a small brown bird darting between the trees. For a brief moment, it felt like a good omen, a sign that life still pulsed within this ancient forest. But the bird vanished as quickly as it appeared, plunging me back into a sense of unsettling isolation. Hours seemed to both crawl and evaporate. I followed the faint ribbon of the trail, my senses on high alert. The snap of a twig underfoot made me jolt, the rustle of wind through the leaves a whisper carrying unknown threats. Even the familiar scent of damp earth and pine needles felt strange and alien, tainted by my fear. As the afternoon wore on, a gnawing unease crept into my gut. This search might have been a terrible mistake. I was hopelessly out of my depth, stumbling through a vast expanse that held countless dangers, seen and unseen. Images of search and rescue teams hauling out broken bodies flashed through my mind, and a wave of nausea washed over me. Then I heard it, a faint rhythmic thudding echoing through the trees. At first, I thought it was my frantic heartbeat, but the sound grew more distinct with each step. My hand fumbled for the small flashlight in my pack, its meager beam cutting through the gathering gloom. Suddenly, the trail opened into a clearing, and there it was, an abandoned ranger station, its wooden structure weathered and slumped with neglect. The thudding emanated from somewhere inside. Hope surged within me, followed by a wave of trepidation. Was someone here? Could they help me find Sarah? Or was this something far more sinister? My heart pounded against my ribs as I approached the derelict ranger station. The thudding sound had ceased, replaced by an eerie quiet that made my skin crawl. The windows were boarded up, casting the interior into impenetrable darkness. I circled the structure, my stomach churning. If Sarah had been here, she would have left a sign. Just as I was about to give up, a flicker of movement in the dense undergrowth at the edge of the clearing caught my eye. A figure darted between the trees, hunched, cloaked in tattered rags. My breath hitched. Could this be a vagrant? A squatter who had taken refuge within the abandoned building? Hello? My voice cracked in the heavy silence. The figure froze, then slowly turned to face me. She was ancient, her face a map of wrinkles etched by countless seasons, her eyes sharp and piercing beneath unkempt gray hair. An air of unsettling stillness surrounded her, a sense of something beyond the ordinary. "You shouldn't be here," she rasped, her voice barely louder than a rustle of leaves. I'm looking for my wife," I managed to stammer. "Sarah. She disappeared near here." Desperate, I dug into my pocket and pulled out a photo of Sarah, her radiant smile a stark contrast to the gloom of the woods. The old woman examined the photo for a moment that stretched into eternity, then shook her head slowly. "Can you help me?" I pleaded. Panic and frustration welled up in my throat. "Please, if you've seen anything." A flicker of something like pity crossed her weathered face. She held out a bony finger and pointed deep into the forest. "The whispering pines," she croaked. "They guide, and they take." I stared at her, perplexed. "What do you mean?" The old woman turned abruptly and vanished into the dense foliage as silently as she had appeared. With a shiver, I surveyed the dark expanse of forest she had indicated. The air felt thick, charged with an oppressive energy. The name, Whispering Pines, echoed in my head, mingling with Sarah's cryptic note. Was this a clue or a warning? The fading light and gnawing uncertainty in my gut urged me to turn back. But my love for Sarah, the frantic desperation to find her, silenced the voice of reason. I took a deep breath and plunged back into the woods. As I followed the unseen trail deeper into the woods, a profound disorientation settled over me. The towering trees closed in, blocking out the last vestiges of sunlight. The forest floor was a tangled carpet of moss, roots, and fallen leaves that muffled my footsteps. My sense of direction wavered, every path, every fallen log, looking frighteningly alike. Fear nibbled at the edge of my awareness. This forest was not a place for casual wanderers. I was trespassing on some ancient, unknowable domain, and the sense of being watched grew stronger with each faltering step. The rustling of leaves no longer seemed like the wind, but the disturbed movement of unseen creatures. As dusk painted the forest in hues of deep shadow, the air crackled with a strange energy. It began as a whisper, the faintest rustle carried on the breeze, but steadily swelled into an incoherent chorus. Disembodied voices seemed to hiss and murmur, rising and falling in an unsettling symphony that set my teeth on edge. A wave of dizziness washed over me, momentarily blurring my vision. When my sight cleared, I was consumed by terror. There, Hanging from a low-hanging branch just a few feet ahead was a ragged piece of blue fabric. I recognized it immediately, the same shade as Sarah's favorite hiking shirt. My stomach lurched. Hope and dread warred within me. I tore the fabric from the branch, my fingers trembling. It was definitely hers, the edges frayed and torn. But was this a sign that she was near, or something far more sinister? The whispering voices mocked me, growing louder as I clung to the flimsy scrap of cloth, unable to discern any words from the maddening chorus. Panic threatened to consume me, but I fought it back. My ragged breaths mingled with the whispering wind as I pressed on, following an invisible thread in the suffocating embrace of the woods. As night descended, the forest became a realm of living shadows. The once familiar forms of trees and undergrowth morphed into grotesque shapes, their twisting limbs seeming to reach out for me. The canopy above transformed into a stifling ceiling, the sliver of moon barely penetrating its inky depths. If the forest had felt watchful before, it now felt openly malicious. Stumbling onwards, driven more by frantic desperation than any coherent plan, I crashed through the undergrowth, branches whipping at my face like angry tendrils. Thorns tore at my skin, and I felt the sting of countless insect bites. But physical pain was nothing compared to the rising panic gnawing at my sanity. The whispers had solidified into eerie fragments of phrases, hinted insults and chilling threats hissed on the fetid air. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the voices seemed to penetrate my very skull. Were they tricks of my overwrought mind, or was there some malevolent presence lurking within these woods, toying with me? A blinding crash of movement in the darkness made me cry out. Just as quickly it subsided. But now, a new fear coursed through my veins. I was not alone out here. Something was tracking my every step. My flashlight beam sliced through the blackness, revealing glimpses of unnerving movement in my peripheral vision. Yellow eyes gleamed back for a terrifying instant before vanishing into the gloom. Low, guttural growls echoed, sending shivers down my spine. Predators, both animal and perhaps something far more sinister, were closing in. I stumbled upon a small clearing, moonlight washing over what looked like a campsite. Relief flooded me. Perhaps this was some hunter's temporary shelter. But as I drew closer, a bone-chilling sight shattered my hope. The camp was a scene of carnage. A tent lay shredded, belongings scattered in chaotic disarray. A sickening metallic smell hung in the air, and dark stains marred the ground. Then I saw it, a flash of blue fabric snagged on a broken branch, the same shade, Sarah's. I choked back a sob, despair and terror battling within me. Was this where she met her end? All rationality fled. With a wordless cry, I bolted back into the darkness, scrambling blindly through the undergrowth. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs buckled beneath me, collapsing into the leaf-strewn ground. Surrounded by the monstrous shapes of the trees, the whispers closing in, I wept in helpless despair. Dawn broke through the forest canopy, casting an ethereal, sickly gray light upon the scene of my despair. I lay there, shivering, my body aching with exhaustion, my mind a shattered mess of grief, fear, and creeping madness. Yet the whispers had momentarily subsided, offering the illusion of respite in that desolate place. Lost in my hollow shell of anguish, I was startled by a rustle nearby. Whirling around, every nerve on edge, I saw him. An old man stood at the edge of the clearing, his face weathered and lined, his eyes piercing beneath a shock of thick white hair. He wore tattered camouflage and carried a worn hunting rifle with casual familiarity. I was too weak to flee, too numb to even feel fear. "You should not be here," he rasped, his voice laden with both warning and weariness. "Sarah, my wife," was all I could manage to croak out. "She disappeared." He studied me for a long moment, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. "The whispering pines take those who do not respect them," he said finally. Then his expression hardened. "And they do not give back willingly. Can Can you help me find her? I clutched at straws of hope, pathetically desperate. The old man sighed, a sound that hinted at an immeasurable burden. I am a hunter, he said, and this forest holds many dangers, both seen and unseen. Tell me what happened. Haltingly, I recounted the events leading up to Sarah's disappearance, my search, the disturbing things I'd found in the woods. His face remained a mask, but his eyes reflected a growing unease. When I described the whispers, the menacing feeling of being hunted, a flicker of something like recognition crossed his gaze. Come, he said, his voice low. There's a safe place nearby. You can rest, and then we will speak of this some more. Numbly, I followed him through the undergrowth along a hidden trail I'd somehow missed in my frenzied wandering. We came to a small clearing, where a weathered wooden cabin stood, partially obscured by dense foliage. Smoke rose from a stone chimney, and the faint scent of wood smoke and something indefinably earthy hung in the air. The old man gestured me inside, and I stumbled through the doorway, collapsing onto a rough-hewn bench. You know of this place, I rasped, my voice hoarse. You know something. He crossed the room, his movements heavy, then placed a steaming mug into my shaking hands. Drink, he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. I obeyed, the warmth of the bitter herbal concoction reviving a flicker of life within me. They call me Old Jonas, he finally said, easing himself into a creaking chair. I have lived in these woods my entire life, seen things city folk dismiss as superstition. His gaze locked onto mine. My mother, her mother before her, all touched by the forest's power. I have learned to listen, to survive. And you? He leaned forward slightly. You have stumbled into something ancient and uncaring. Old Jonas's cabin was a haven of rough-hewn comfort within the heart of the encroaching wilderness. He fed me a simple, nourishing stew, and as its warmth spread through my worn body, so did a fragile sense of calm. We sat by the fire, shadows dancing on the log walls as Jonas spun his tale. The trees listen, the ground remembers, he rasped. This forest, it is a living thing, ancient beyond imagining, and it holds on to what it claims. He explained how his ancestors had coexisted, albeit warily, with the spirit of the place, respecting its boundaries and power. There's an entity bound to this land, he said, his voice low. Some call it a guardian, others a demon. It feeds on emotion, draws in souls. Your wife, her disappearance. He left the sentence unfinished, but the implication hung heavy in the air. My hands clenched into fists. Sarah's not dead. I won't believe that. His sigh was a whisper amongst the crackle of firewood. Hope, it is both a blessing and a curse in this place. Unable to bear the silence, I told him about the fight, my harsh words lashing out at Sarah before she'd vanished. Guilt washed over me anew, a bitter counterpoint to Jonas's tale. His gaze softened with the hint of a tragic understanding. The night deepened, the forest outside rustling and sighing as if in conversation. Suddenly, a sound cut through the gloom, a melody drifting on the wind. Sarah's voice. I bolted upright, my heart thudding against my ribs. That's her! Jonas held up a hand for silence, a tense frown furrowing his brow. The melody was one Sarah used to hum, a soothing, wordless song born of shared moments of contentment. But now it was tinged with an eerie melancholy, the notes wavering and uncertain like a haunting lullaby. It's a lure, Jonas said grimly, confirming my worst suspicions. I tore towards the door. Sarah's voice, faint yet tantalizingly close, whispered my name, laced with an echo of pleading. David! Jonas's shout halted me at the threshold. You must resist. If you walk out there now, you're lost for good. His voice was thick with urgency, a stark contrast to his usual stoicism. I hesitated, torn between desperate love and rising fear. Sarah's song wound around my heart, a siren call into the darkness. Yet somewhere deep down, a cold dread coiled in my gut, a primal instinct warring against the intoxicating melody. Sarah's song tugged at my soul with a force that threatened to tear me apart. Each note, once a source of warmth and joy, now felt barbed, tainted with an otherworldly sorrow. "I have to go to her," I cried, my voice choked. Jonas grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Her soul may linger, but her body, it belongs to the forest now," he said, his words cutting through my desperation like a cold knife. I struggled against him, but he held firm. "This is a trap. There's a way to save her, I know it." My words trailed off, replaced by a gut-churning sob. The old hunter's eyes softened. "There is always a price," he said quietly. "The price the forest demands is your sanity, your life, your very soul." A jolt of horror ran through me. Had I already begun to play into its hands? My reckless journey, the desperation fueling my actions? Were those my own desires, or a manipulation woven by this ancient power? Show me where they took her," I pleaded, the fight draining from my voice. He hesitated for a long moment, then nodded wearily. "Come, but do not trust anything you see or hear." Back into the heart of the woods we ventured, following an unseen trail only Jonas could discern. As we walked, he warned me of the illusions that lay in wait, the tricks the forest played to ensnare its prey. The deeper we went, the more the forest felt like a living, breathing organism, pulsating with an unsettling energy. Finally, we reached it, a clearing, shrouded in a perpetual, unnatural gloom. In its center stood a ring of immense twisted stones, their surfaces etched with strange, unsettling symbols. The air here thrummed, the very ground beneath our feet seeming to vibrate with suppressed malevolence. My heart hammered a frantic tattoo against my ribs. "That's where the whispers come from," I breathed, my voice filled with awe and terror. A soft cry drew my attention. In the murky half-light, a figure was bound to a central monolith. Sarah. Her once vibrant form was pale and motionless, her face frozen in a mask of vacant despair. Rage and agony exploded within me. "Sarah!" I rushed forward, but Jonas held me back with a surprising force. "She's not really there," he hissed. "It's an echo, an image designed to break you." My breath hitched. He was right. As I looked closer, her figure seemed to waver, the edges blurring like a reflection in rippling water. Yet the pain in my chest was agonizingly real. "Let me go." I struggled against Jonas's grip, desperation fueling my futile resistance. "Don't you see? She needs me." "To complete the ritual," Jonas said grimly. "To fully surrender your soul to this cursed place." I froze. The ritual. Suddenly, snippets of Jonas's warnings clicked into place. Not a rescue, but a sacrifice. I wasn't here to save Sarah, but to unwittingly participate in her destruction. I had become the hunter's prey. "But why?" I cried out, my voice thick with despair. "Some are drawn to darkness, even those with good hearts. Your wife may have been one of them." Jonas's words were a death knell. Had Sarah, under the forest's influence, been a willing participant in some terrible rite, a sacrifice to keep its power alive? The thought cut deeper than any blade. "No!" I tore myself free of Jonas, blind fury surging within me. "I'll take my chances with the forest over whatever you have planned." Lunging toward the spectral image of Sarah, I felt the ground shift beneath me. Illusion shattered. There was no circle of stones, no pleading echo of my lost love, only dense undergrowth and the mocking whispers of the wind. "Damn you!" I spun, my fists clenched, ready to strike Jonas for his deception. But he wasn't there. His form had dissolved into wisps of mist, leaving me alone in the malevolent embrace of the forest. Then I saw her, standing just inside the tree line, silhouetted against the deepening gloom, was a solitary figure. A woman. She wore a tattered, dirt-streaked dress and carried a simple woven basket. Her long, dark hair was disheveled, yet there was a strange grace in her movements. "You are lost," she said, her voice as soft as the rustling of leaves. A sense of dread mingled with curiosity washed over me. Every instinct screamed to turn and run, yet a lingering flicker of hope kept me rooted in place. "Who are you?" My voice sounded ragged and weak in the heavy silence of the forest. She smiled, revealing a flash of startlingly white teeth against her tanned skin. "Some call me the Guardian. Some, the Witch. It depends on who is seeking me, and what they are prepared to offer." "You know Sarah," I blurted out, desperate for any scrap of information. Her smile widened, chilling me to the core. "It seems the forest has already brought you a gift," she murmured. "But every gift comes at a price." The woman's presence exuded a chilling allure. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of terror and desperate hope warring within me. "You can help me find Sarah?" I choked out, loathing the weakness in my own voice. "Knowledge can be found," she replied, her voice a silken thread. "But it rarely comes without cost." "What kind of cost?" I demanded, suspicion overriding my fear. She regarded me with unsettling intensity. "A life for a life, sometimes. A soul for a soul. The forest has its own balance, its own rules to uphold." My breath caught in my throat, a terrible understanding flooded through me. The whispers, the spectral visions, all manipulated to bring me to this twisted bargain. "The ritual," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "You wanted me to complete it. To sacrifice myself." The woman's smile was a thin, cold line. "Your love is powerful, a worthy offering to the Whispering Pines. But there may be other options." "Tell me!" I stepped closer, my voice rising in a desperate plea. "What can I do to get her back?" She reached into her basket and withdrew a small, gnarled twig. "This," she rasped, holding it aloft, "is heartwood, taken from the very core of the oldest tree in the forest. It holds the forest's memory, its secrets." She lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "For the right price, I can open those secrets to you." Panic clawed at my gut. This woman was a predator, another agent of the forest's insatiable hunger. Yet the thought of Sarah, her soul trapped in this malevolent place, drove me to the brink of madness. "What is your price?" I asked, my voice hoarse. The woman's eyes gleamed in the twilight. "A year of servitude," she purred. "Bound to me, to this place. You will see things that would drive a weaker man insane. Do things that will blacken your very soul." A year of my life, a sacrifice of my own sanity. Yet, if it meant even the slimmest chance to find Sarah, to free her from this forest, wasn't it worth it? I accept," I choked out, the words like acid on my tongue. The woman's smile widened, the expression far from reassuring. "The pact is made," she said softly. "Now, let us begin." The woman led me further into the forest, her steps silent on the mossy ground. With each step, the shadows thickened, and the air grew heavy, pregnant with unspoken menace. Gone was the hesitant, frantic David. In his place was a man driven by a desperate, singular purpose. I had made my choice, and I would cling to it no matter the cost. We reached a hidden grove concealed from sight by a curtain of ancient, gnarled trees. In the center of the clearing, a massive oak stood, its immense trunk dwarfing anything nearby. Moonlight filtered through its skeletal branches, casting intricate patterns on the ground, a macabre dance of light and shadow. "This is the Whispering Heart," rasped the woman, "the epicenter of the forest's power." She pulled the gnarled twig from her basket, then motioned for me to kneel before the oak. Its bark, rough and scored with the passage of countless years, pulsed with an unsettling rhythm, as though alive. The woman pressed the twig to my forehead, and a jolt like a lightning strike shot through my body. Suddenly I was drowning in a torrent of images, sounds, raw emotion. I saw the forest through the eyes of ancient trees, their roots coiling deep into the earth, connecting them to a vast underground tapestry of life and death. Whispers became voices, mournful cries, fragments of ancient songs, echoes of vengeful spirits bound to the land. Each whisper carried a weight of longing, of unfulfilled desires, of insatiable hunger. The forest was not simply a place, it was a sentient being, vast and unforgiving. And then, Sarah. Not the spectral echo I had chased, but glimpses of her true essence. Laughter, tears, moments of joy and pain shared between us, and moments I'd forgotten, subtle flickers of darkness within her. A love of solitude that bordered on reclusiveness, an obsession with the local legends of the forest. The vision ceased abruptly, and I gasped, collapsing to the ground. Every muscle ached, my head throbbed. The world spun sickeningly, and I tasted bile at the back of my throat. "You have seen much," croaked the woman as I struggled to sit upright. "But there is more. Much more." The visions continued, relentless and disorienting. Through the heartwood, I touched fragments of history, forgotten rituals, blood sacrifices offered to appease the forest's ancient hunger. I witnessed acts of unspeakable cruelty and fleeting moments of fragile beauty, a constant battle between light and encroaching shadow. But most terrifying of all was the growing realization that the forest entity, it wasn't simply a passive observer. It actively manipulated events, fueled by the emotions it harvested. Whispers became manipulative, targeted. It sowed discord, played on hopes and fears. Had it lured Sarah deeper? Had her disappearance been a twisted, calculated gambit, and my own desperate search merely playing into its hands? The thought sent a wave of icy terror through me. I was not the hunter here. I was the hunted, a pawn maneuvered toward some terrible, unknowable end. I thought of Jonas, a man broken by a lifetime, burdened by knowledge. Was this the same darkness creeping into my own soul? My servitude to the woman in the cabin became a warped form of apprenticeship. She taught me the secret paths of the forest, the hidden trails invisible to ordinary eyes. I learned to decipher the rustles and murmurs of its language, the unsettling chorus of whispers revealing hidden intent. With each lesson, the boundary between myself and the forest blurred. The whispers, once terrifying, now carried an insidious familiarity. I felt their tendrils reaching into my mind, probing my emotions, seeking out the cracks in my resolve. As the weeks stretched into months, the memory of the life I had once led began to fade like a half-forgotten dream. My quest to save Sarah warped into a desperate struggle for self-preservation against the encroaching darkness. The lines between dreams and reality frayed. Nightmares seeped into my waking hours. Monstrous figures birthed from twisted trees pursued me through claustrophobic thickets. The whispers coiled around me, a chorus of accusation and mockery, promising that Sarah was lost, that her soul was already one with the malevolent heart of the forest. The woman in the cabin observed my decline with an unnerving detachment. She fed me bitter concoctions to heighten my senses, to make me even more susceptible to the forest's seductive darkness. My body grew lean and hardened, my skin taking on the rough-hewn texture of weathered wood. But one night, a dream pierced the haze. It wasn't a haunting vision twisted by the forest, but a simple, precious memory. Sarah and I in our old kitchen, the air thick with the aroma of baking bread. Her face flushed, a smudge of flour on her cheek, as she laughed at my clumsy attempts to help. It was a snapshot of normalcy, a beacon of warmth piercing the relentless chill that had settled over my soul. I woke with a strangled cry, not of fear, but of a desperate, aching longing. It triggered a defiance within me, a flicker of the old David clawing his way out of the numbness the forest was trying to impose. My perception shifted. I noticed the birdsong filtering faintly through the oppressive canopy, the delicate beauty of wildflowers struggling to blossom in the shadowed undergrowth. It was as if the forest, so eager to consume my despair, couldn't entirely drown out my fundamental connection to the natural world. The next time I encountered the woman, she sensed the change. "You are resisting," she said, the accusation edged with cold fury. "I won't let the darkness take me," I growled back. The words surprised me with their strength. "Then you also deny the power I promised." Her voice trailed off threateningly, but a defiant seed had been planted. The woman's manipulations, once absolute in their authority, began to reveal cracks. I saw her not as a powerful mystic, but as a creature molded by the forest, enslaved just as I was. Then, one twilight evening, the whispers carried a melody I recognized. Sarah's song, the one that had lured me to the ritual circle. Yet now there was an undercurrent, a subtle plea masked beneath the sadness. Was it a trick, another forest manipulation? Or a cry from Sarah's fading soul, reaching out to me? I could no longer passively accept the forest's insidious corruption. Whether trick or truth, Sarah's song ignited a reckless surge of desperate action. Driven by a mix of fading love and a primal need for self-preservation, I confronted the woman. "There's another way," I rasped. "A way to sever the forest's hold, release those it has bound." It was a gamble, knowledge gleaned from whispered fragments and half-understood visions. The woman regarded me with cold calculation. A dangerous ritual with little chance of success. And if you fail. She didn't need to finish her threat. Yet the risk of inaction now seemed a far greater horror. We returned to the Whispering Heart, the great oak looming over us. Carved into its trunk were symbols, ancient and terrible. I shuddered, recognizing them from the fragmented visions the Heartwood had shown me. Sights of sacrifice, of spilled blood offered to appease the forest's hunger. "You must make the offering," she hissed, pushing a crude bone knife into my hand. "Your blood, freely given." Every instinct screamed at me to refuse, yet a stronger, self-destructive part of me knew she spoke the truth. Closing my eyes, I slashed the knife across my palm. My blood wept onto the rough bark, tracing the terrible symbols, staining the thirsty wood. The forest shrieked, a chorus of rage echoing through the branches. I crumpled to my knees as a wave of agonized energy surged through the clearing, the air crackling with unnatural power. The woman recoiled, her face a mask of terror. From the depths of the monstrous tree, a figure emerged. Not the spectral echo I had seen before, but Sarah, her form solidified but flickering with an otherworldly light. Her eyes held both accusation and a haunting sorrow. "No!" the woman screeched, lunging forward. Sarah raised a hand and the woman was hurled backwards, her body slamming into a tree with a sickening thud. She lay unmoving, her power broken. Sarah turned to me, her gaze piercing through me. Then, with a heartbreaking sigh, her form dissolved, fading back into the ancient oak, leaving me alone and trembling within the heart of the forest. The forest erupted in fury. The ground beneath me trembled violently, roots surging upwards like monstrous serpents. The once sheltering canopy of branches twisted and groaned, raining leaves and debris. Sunlight vanished as a suffocating darkness descended, smothering what remained of the clearing's fragile beauty. The whisper swelled into a deafening shriek. No longer individual voices, but a single monstrous entity fueled by rage at my betrayal. It lashed out, its energy coiling around me, seeking to crush, suffocate, consume. I collapsed, gasping for air, my vision fading to black. This was the end. Just when a flicker of hope had ignited within me, it was ruthlessly extinguished. I had defied the forest, and now I paid the price. But in that moment of surrender, a flicker of defiance flared. I thought of Sarah, of her laughter, of the warm love we had shared. That love, that fundamental humanity, was something the forest had underestimated. I would not give in, would not become another twisted guardian, another lost soul. And then a sound pierced the relentless roar of the forest, a growl, guttural and laced with fury, yet not of the forest. It was Jonas. The old hunter burst into the clearing, his rifle raised. A gunshot boomed, cutting through the oppressive energy. "Run, boy!" he roared, his voice ragged. Another gunshot echoed as he desperately fought back the encroaching roots reaching for him. I scrambled to my feet. My legs felt impossibly weak. My lungs burned, but somehow adrenaline pushed me on. Jonas and I, a desperate force of two against the might of a corrupted ancient forest. We fled, crashing through the undergrowth, the enraged forest hot on our heels. The darkness pursued, the whispers promising a fate worse than death. Branches whipped at us like vengeful tendrils. The earth heaved and bucked beneath our feet. And then finally we hit the boundary. An unseen barrier, but the enraged energy of the forest slammed into it with a resounding crackle. We stumbled clear, collapsing on the sunlit forest floor outside its bounds. We lay on the forest floor, gasping for breath. Beyond the boundary, the forest raged impotently. It was over. I had escaped. But how? "How did you—" I started to ask, but Jonas cut me off with a weary grunt. "That woman, she's a double-edged sword." He struggled to his feet, his weathered face taut with a mix of determination and grim resignation. "She knew her hold on you was weakening, knew you might threaten her power. She nudged me in your direction." I stared at him, understanding starting to dawn. "The Heartwood? The visions?" He nodded. "Ritual's not done. The forest is wounded, but alive. Needs sustenance to heal itself. The entity, it's changed tactics. It wants you back. Badly." A wave of nausea swept over me. My blood started the ritual. Now it wants me to complete it? "Worse," Jonas rasped, his eyes haunted. "It doesn't want the ritual, it wants you. To corrupt you, twist you into its new guardian. Maybe something worse, something none of us can understand." Despair threatened to swallow me whole. I had defied the forest, only to be drawn back, marked for an even darker fate. Jonas placed a rough hand on my shoulder. "But we ain't done yet. There's a way to fight back, risky as hell, but it's a chance." He explained, his voice low and urgent. Deep within the forest, beyond even the whispering heart, lay the very source of its power. If we could reach it, disrupt it, it might break the forest's hold, or destroy it entirely. "We're walking straight into the belly of the beast," Jonas said, his voice thick with a fatalistic acceptance. "But ain't no other choice, boy. This thing keeps growing. It'll eventually break its boundaries, consume everything in its path." I looked at Jonas, this hardened, solitary man haunted by the forest's darkness. He was offering me a chance, not to save Sarah, but to save what was left of myself, and possibly the world beyond. I swallowed hard, fear coiling in my gut like a venomous snake. "Let's do it," I said. The words barely a whisper, but laden with a desperate determination born of despair. It was suicide, perhaps. But it was also the only way forward. Our return journey into the whispering forest was a descent into madness. The whispers morphed into chilling accusations, twisting my past regrets into weapons to break me. Shadows contorted into monstrous shapes that lurked just beyond my sight. The lingering scent of decay clinging to the air. The ground beneath us felt hungry, ready to open up and devour us whole. Jonas moved with the silent, practiced ease of a man who had spent a lifetime confronting the horrors of the woods. His eyes, ever watchful, seemed to pierce the gloom, navigating an unseen path only he could discern. Yet, even he wasn't immune to the forest's insidious corruption. His hands trembled slightly around his rifle, and his usually stoic face was etched with strain. "It's getting to me," he rasped one night as we huddled around a meager fire, its flames struggling against the suffocating darkness. "Not just the whispers, the feel of the place. It's seeping into my bones." He unbuttoned his worn shirt, revealing a patch of his chest where the skin had darkened, veins tracing unnatural patterns upon it. "This is what happens when you fight it too long," he said. "It takes its toll." A cold fear seeped into my heart. Was this to be my fate as well? Transformed into something monstrous, a warped echo of the man I was? Jonas, sensing my fear, offered a grim smile. "But that's why we gotta do this, boy. Finish it one way or another. No one deserves a fate like this, not even the damned forest itself." His words held a weary weight, a testament to the price he and others had paid in his endless battle against the encroaching shadows. Days stretched into a disorienting haze, the line between waking and nightmare dissolving. The closer we got to the forest's dark heart, the less human Jonas seemed, his movements growing jerky, his words slurring into half-formed mutterings. I was all that was left, a flickering candle against the all-consuming night. Then, as if sensing my rising despair, the woman in the cabin reappeared. She stood at the edge of our campsite, her form a silhouette against the encroaching darkness. Her presence seethed with suppressed rage, a testament to her broken power. "You failed," she spat, her voice raw with barely restrained violence. "The ritual was your last chance." I held my ground, fueled by a desperate mix of fear and defiance. "You used me. Used Sarah, just like the forest does." Her lips twisted into a cruel smile. "And now the forest will use you. But even that is better than nothing," she sneered. "Enjoy your transformation, pawn. It will be slow, agonizing." She turned and vanished into the shadows, but her words lingered, venomous barbs burrowing into my mind. Had I made the ultimate mistake? Had I delivered myself directly into the jaws of the beast? Jonas, slumped against a tree, let out a shuddering sigh. "Don't listen to her poison," he croaked, struggling to his feet. "One step at a time, boy. That's all we got left." And so we continued, faltering steps towards an uncertain end. We reached a place where the very air crackled with unnatural energy. The trees here twisted and groaned, their branches skeletal claws reaching toward a sky forever shrouded in gloom. The ground beneath our feet felt brittle, as if we walked upon a thin shell above a monstrous, unknowable void. "We're close," Jonas rasped, his voice barely audible over the deafening whispers now howling around us. "Can you hear it? Like a heartbeat, slow and rotten?" And I could. A rhythmic thudding echoed beneath the cacophony of the forest, a pulse that felt sickeningly alive and impossibly vast. We stumbled forward, drawn by a morbid fascination. The trees parted, revealing a sight that stole the breath from my lungs. In a clearing the size of a village square stood the mother tree, larger than any redwood I'd ever seen, its trunk a monstrous, pulsing mass of gnarled wood and exposed roots. The air around it shimmered with a heat that had nothing to do with the sun, and the stench of decay was almost overpowering. Jonas slumped to his knees, his face etched with a combination of awe and horror. This is it. The source. The damned heart of the whole thing. But it was the base of the monstrous tree that turned my blood to ice. There, partially entombed within the grasping roots, was Sarah. Her once vibrant form was pale and withered, vines and moss clinging to her skin, like a grotesque parody of a burial shroud. Her eyes were open, vacant orbs staring unseeingly into the depths of the monstrous tree. "Sarah!" I choked out, my voice breaking. Jonas laid a hand on my shoulder, his touch surprisingly gentle. "It ain't her anymore, boy. Not really. Just an echo, a vessel for the forest. There has to be a way." Jonas shook his head sadly. This is beyond saving. Best we can do is give her peace. Stop this unholy thing from claiming more souls. He fumbled in his pack and withdrew a bundle wrapped in oilskin. Dynamite, he rasped. Enough to bring the whole damn thing down. The forest raged, throwing everything it had at us. The roots surged from the earth. The whispers lashed out with an intensity that threatened to shatter my sanity. Jonas, with a strength I didn't know he possessed, fought them off, buying me time. I scrambled to the base of the mother tree, placing the explosives against its monstrous roots. Sarah's vacant eyes seemed to focus on me, a spark of awareness in their depths. Or was it only my desperate hope? "I'm so sorry, Sarah," I whispered, a sob rising in my throat. "I love you." And then, for a fraction of a second, a flicker of recognition crossed her face. A tear rolled down her withered cheek, and her lips formed a single silent word. "Run." I turned and fled. The blast echoed through the forest, a roar of defiance against the ancient darkness. I crashed through the undergrowth, driven by instinct more than any plan. The world erupted in flames and chaos, a symphony of crashing trees and agonizing shrieks that pierced the night. When I finally staggered clear, collapsing in a heap on the trembling earth, I turned to witness the forest's death throes. Flames soared skyward. The maddened whispers sputtered and died, replaced by a silence more deafening than any noise. It was over, or was it? As the smoke cleared, a lone figure emerged from the shattered remains of the clearing. A woman, her once vibrant form shrunken and withered. Sarah. Not the monster the forest had shaped her into, but an echo, a fragile remnant of the love we once shared. I stumbled to her, tears coursing down my face. Her eyes met mine, filled with a heartbreaking mix of sorrow and relief. "It's over," she whispered, her voice frail. I held her for a long moment, sharing the warmth of human touch for the last time. And as the first rays of dawn pierced the wounded canopy, Sarah's form flickered and dissolved, leaving behind only the lingering scent of wildflowers and the faintest hint of her song echoing in the morning breezy. Sarah shivered, and not just from the October chill. Blackwater Creek felt less like stepping into a quaint town and more like walking into the parted jaws of a wolf. The old-timers at the Creekside Inn watched her every move, suspicion souring the stale air. Even Millie, the waitress with tired eyes, flinched back as Sarah ordered a coffee, black and strong as the unease building in her chest. "You're an outsider," the grizzled innkeeper grunted when she asked about the woods. "Blackheart Woods. That's no place for folk who don't know better." "I'm just here to study the local legends," Sarah tried for a reassuring smile. It came out more like a grimace. The man's gaze was as unyielding as a tombstone. "Those ain't just legends, miss. There's truth in the darkness, the kind that can tear your soul apart." He wouldn't say more. No one would. Yet the whispers were relentless. Something about missing folks, cattle ripped open by claws no coyote possessed, and those nights when the wind sounded less like wind and more like a mournful howl echoing from the heart of Blackheart Woods. Sarah wasn't a fool. She could feel the town closing in around her, a noose of sidelong glances and muttered curses. But there was Cassie, the waitress who lingered at her table, fear and a desperate sort of hope flickering in her eyes. "Silas knows," Cassie whispered one night as the tavern emptied, a single flickering oil lamp throwing grotesque shadows. "They call him the town crazy, but he knows more about those woods than anybody alive." Sarah found Silas by the creek, a grizzled man mumbling to the rippling water. When she spoke, he startled like a cornered animal. But then his eyes, cloudy yet sharp, seemed to cut right through her. "You think they're just stories, don't you?" He spat out a laugh that sounded like leaves rotting. "Stories don't leave half-eaten carcasses and pools of blood. Stories don't scream till the whole forest goes deathly quiet." His voice dropped. "They ain't natural, the things in Blackheart. Smart as hell they are, You'll go in there poking at their secrets, and they'll poke right back. The fog clung to Blackheart Woods like a shroud. Each step on that overgrown path was a plunge into a suffocating stillness. The trees themselves seemed to writhe, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching from the undergrowth. The silence was a living thing, a monstrous heartbeat thrumming in her ears. She couldn't shake the feeling it was a trap, the woods themselves a hungry waiting mouth. A flash of movement made her whip around, heart pounding a desperate tattoo against her ribs. Nothing. Or had that been a flicker of shadow, vanishing into the twisting limbs? Then she heard it. A ragged breath, rasping and guttural. Terror squeezed her into a frozen statue. The creature was monstrous. For a heart-stopping second it was there, a hulking, twisted shape moving with impossible speed in the dim light. Then it was gone, melted back into the oppressive gloom. Her legs worked before her brain did, stumbling and tearing through the undergrowth. There was a game being played, and Sarah was the hunted. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves had her whirling, searching for the gleam of those terrible, intelligent eyes. She wouldn't let herself become another Blackwater Creek tale. Some half-truth whispered around flickering lamps. Sarah hadn't found sleep again, not since her nightmare excursion into the Blackheart. Her room in the Creekside Inn felt like a coffin. Every creak of the floorboards was a footstep, every moan of the wind a hungry cry. Please say I'm going crazy. The words were a desperate prayer on her tongue. Then came the scratching from inside the walls. Blackwater Creek's whispers had turned from wary to overtly hostile. The innkeeper's eyes were slits of accusation. Cassie had disappeared, replaced by a sullen woman who dropped Sarah's food off without a word. But those walls had ears, and the scratching had turned into a low, rhythmic thumping. She could hear the whisper of breath now, hot and foul, tickling the back of her neck as she lay paralyzed with terror each night. The town's old library, mildewed and dusty, became her refuge. Each brittle page she turned seemed to echo with the weight of forgotten horrors. There it was, a fragmented tale of a tribe older than memory. The Cree, whispered to have worshipped something dark and nameless. They'd vanished, seemingly wiped out overnight. Save for tales of offerings left deep in the Blackheart, offerings that walked out changed. The Briar Woman, a withered crone had hissed when Sarah asked after someone who might know more. She ain't of this town, but she knows the old ways, dangerous ways. Maggie Briar clung to the edge of Blackwater like a burr. Her ramshackle hut reeked of herbs and something Sarah couldn't name. Fear, with a strange note of desperate pity. I saw ye, the Briar Woman croaked, eyes swirling like muddy water. Saw ye in the woods. The things marked ye, girl. They're toying, drawing it out. Maggie spoke of ancient stones wreathed in blood, of pacts forged beneath a black moon. The Cree didn't die, she rasped. They changed, became more than men, less than beasts, and they hunger. Armed with only a trembling resolve and Maggie Briar's cryptic fragments of ritual, Sarah trekked back into Blackheart. The air hung heavy, the stillness now charged with a malevolent anticipation. As Briar had instructed, she reached a hidden clearing, choking on bile at the sight of the moss-covered stones. Crude figures adorned them, men twisted in impossible poses, merging with monstrous shapes. A twig snapped behind her. She whirled, the clearing a swirling blur of green and choking shadows. They were never stories, she choked out, defiance mingling with a desperate terror. Never just myths. Something guttural echoed through the trees, neither fully human nor fully animal. It was the sound of ancient hunger, and its eyes, those terrible yellow eyes, burned through the gloom. The moon hung swollen and red in the sky the night the creatures came. Blackwater Creek wasn't merely silent now, it was a tomb. Sarah and Maggie, faces etched with both terror and grim purpose, stood amidst the ruins, the Creekside Inn a distant flicker of flame. The first scream pierced the heavy air. A blur of monstrous shadows descended, tearing through flesh and wood with unnatural ease. The townsfolk, those who hadn't run, had become cattle for the slaughter. "Here, in this place of change," Maggie chanted as the creatures closed in, her voice cutting through the carnage, "we offer ourselves anew, not as prey, but as defiance." Maggie's voice, cracked with age and a lifetime on the fringes, rose in a haunting melody. It wasn't English, wasn't any language Sarah recognized. Yet, the chanting pulsed with a primal rhythm, stirring something deep and dangerous in the air. In the circle of stones, rancid meat and old iron, offerings dictated by Briar's rambling knowledge, glistened under the blood moon. The creatures hesitated, a confused growl rippling among them. Yellow eyes narrowed, not with cunning, but with something akin to surprise. Sarah's hands moved of their own accord. From her pack, she drew the lighter and canister of insect repellent, a makeshift flamethrower, the only weapon she had left. The fire roared, catching Briar's scattered herbs, creating a fiery barrier. The creatures hissed, not in pain but in a primal revulsion towards the unnatural blaze. "They were bound here, child. The rituals, they tethered them to this place." Briar's voice faltered, then boomed with unexpected strength. "And we'll send them back." It wasn't a victory. Not yet. The creatures circled, weaving through the gaps in the flame, still monstrously powerful. But for the first time, there was uncertainty in their movements. Maggie Briar fell first. A clawed hand smashed through the wall of flame, dragging her into the shadows with a scream that ended in a chilling gurgle. Sarah turned grief into fury. Her makeshift flamethrower spat bursts of fire, forcing the creatures back. The stench of burning fur turned the air rancid. She was down to her last flicker of fuel. Every inch of exposed skin burned from the radiated heat, but so did the maddened desperation to survive. The shadows swirled, growing bolder. Then it was there. The largest of them, a twisted parody of what might have once been human. Its eyes held a terrible, calculating hunger. It lunged, and Sarah was out of fuel. She squeezed her eyes shut, expecting the tearing of flesh, the final brutal end. Silence. Then the sound of crashing foliage, followed by a guttural roar fading into the night. The sun rose on the smoking remains of Blackwater Creek. Survivors, hollow-eyed and haunted, crept from the surrounding woods. Sarah stood amidst the ashes, a soot-covered specter clinging to life by a thread. A search party later found Maggie Briar amidst the stones, torn, but with a strange symbol carved into her chest. News reporters descended like vultures. Hysteria and half-truths swirled. Sarah said nothing, for there were no words to describe the primal horror. Yet in the echoes of those monstrous cries, whispers of the Cree legend slithered through the ravaged town. Sarah had survived, but at what cost, and for how long? The Blackheart Woods still loomed in the distance, a scar across the land. The darkness within, she knew, wasn't vanquished. It was merely waiting. The city thrummed with its usual symphony of car horns and jackhammers, a relentless assault on the senses. Trapped in my cubicle, I stared out the window at the concrete jungle, a feeling of suffocation tightening its grip on my chest. It was time. Time to escape the monotony, the deadlines, the relentless pressure that had become my life. Across the aisle, Sarah, my best friend, mirrored my misery. Her bright eyes, usually sparkling with mischief, were dulled by the fluorescent lights. We'd been planning this camping trip for months, a desperate bid to reconnect with nature, with ourselves. "Ready to ditch this concrete jungle?" she asked, a mischievous grin splitting her face. "More than ready," I replied, shoving my laptop shut with a satisfying click. The office chatter seemed to fade as we began packing, a tangible sense of freedom filling the air. There was the usual chaos of last-minute scrambling, Sarah, ever the optimist, overpacking clothes that wouldn't see the light of day, while I meticulously checked our gear, a seasoned camper despite this being only my third trip. John, Sarah's boyfriend, arrived, his booming laugh a welcome contrast to the sterile office environment. John was all easy charm and nervous energy, a stark contrast to Mark, the quiet observer of the group. Mark, my boyfriend, was a man of few words, but his steady presence was a grounding force. We piled into John's beat-up truck, the stench of stale pizza battling with the pine-scented air freshener Sarah had hung in a futile attempt to mask it. As the city skyline receded in the rearview mirror, the tension that had been building for weeks began to ease. Sarah blasted classic rock, her voice harmonizing with the radio as we sang along, a cacophony of joyous noise. The road narrowed, houses giving way to dense forests. Sunlight dappled through the leaves, casting intricate patterns on the worn leather seats. The air grew cooler, cleaner, the scent of pine filling our lungs. We stopped at a weathered gas station, a relic from a bygone era, to stock up on supplies. The old man behind the counter, his face etched with the stories of 1,000 sunrises, gave us a toothless grin and a cryptic warning. Woods ain't what they used to be, young'uns. We dismissed it as small-town superstition, eager for our adventure. Hours later, we reached the trailhead, a wooden sign creaking ominously in the slight breeze. Backpacks hoisted, we set off with light hearts. The trail was a tapestry of green, sunlight filtering through the leaves, creating a cathedral-like atmosphere. Birdsong filled the air, a melodic contrast to the city's relentless cacophony. As the afternoon wore on, shadows grew longer, and a strange stillness settled over the forest. We stopped for lunch by a gurgling stream, the sound of rushing water momentarily masking a growing unease. John, ever the pragmatist, dismissed it as hunger. Sarah, however, shivered, pulling her jacket tighter. "Feels like the forest is holding its breath," she whispered. We pressed on, the silence broken only by the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional snap of a twig. The sun began its descent, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple. We needed to find a campsite before nightfall. Just as doubt began to creep in, Mark pointed ahead. A clearing, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, beckoned. Relief washed over me as we hurried towards it, our pace quickening. This, I thought, this is where we escape. This is where we breathe. The trail wound deeper into the wilderness, the encroaching darkness forcing us to rely on flashlights to cut through the gloom. As we walked, the air grew heavy with the scent of decaying leaves and damp earth. The towering trees seemed to close in, their branches resembling skeletal arms reaching out for us. "This place feels off," Mark muttered, his voice barely a whisper. "It's just your imagination playing tricks," John countered, though his jovial tone lacked conviction. Each step forward felt like a descent into a world apart. I glanced over my shoulder, a creeping sense of unease prickling my skin. Was the forest shifting? The path seemed narrower than before, the trees closer together. "Anyone else feel like we're being watched?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Silence was our only answer. But the feeling intensified. It was a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, an unseen presence just on the edge of perception. We pressed on, our flashlights cutting through the darkness like feeble swords against an ancient power. We reached a bend in the trail, the trees opening momentarily to reveal a moonlit creek. As we paused to refill our water bottles, a rustling sound echoed through the forest. We froze, our breaths held in silent terror. From the corner of my eye, I saw it, a flash of movement in the undergrowth, too fast to discern. But the feeling lingered, the chilling sensation of eyes upon us. John, his voice strained, broke the silence. "Let's keep moving." The hike continued in a haze of paranoia. Shadows danced and twisted, playing tricks on our tired eyes. With every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, fear gnawed at our senses. The forest, once a haven, now felt hostile, alien. We stumbled upon a clearing, a welcome break in the claustrophobic tunnel of trees. Yet, even here, surrounded by the soft glow of the moon, the feeling of being observed persisted. "We're making camp here," John declared, his voice an attempt at authority. He busied himself with unpacking, his movements filled with a nervous energy we all shared. As we ate, the conversation was strained, laughter silenced. I found myself staring into the darkness, dreading what I might see lurking just beyond the reach of our flashlights. Mark, ever the observer, seemed lost in his own thoughts, his eyes reflecting the same unspoken fear as mine. The night was a symphony of unsettling noises. Branches creaked ominously, and distant rustling sounds made our skin crawl. Sleep was elusive, my mind racing with every unidentified sound that pierced the eerie silence. The forest had us trapped, and there was no escape from the feeling that we were far from alone. With shaking hands and forced determination, we set up camp. The once comforting crackle of the campfire now felt sinister, the dancing flames casting grotesque shadows that mirrored the turmoil within us. We huddled closer, an unspoken desire for human connection battling the rising dread. Sarah, her attempt at levity falling flat, suggests we lighten the mood with stories. Anyone got a good ghost story? Instead of the usual campfire tales of summer camp and urban legends, John recounts an old tale he heard growing up in the backwoods. He tells of a creature, a forest guardian, that punishes those who disrespect the land with its haunting call, a spine-chilling wail that echoes through the trees at night. Mark dismisses it as mere folklore, his logical voice a feeble shield against the chilling power of such a tale. Suddenly, a mournful cry pierces the stillness. It's a sound like nothing I've ever heard, rising and falling with an inhuman cadence. Fear wraps icy fingers around my heart. We stare at each other in wide-eyed horror, the firelight reflecting our primal terror. Was it just the wind or something far more sinister? Silence falls once more, but the unsettling cry lingers in our minds. We try to rationalize, clinging desperately to normalcy. It was an animal, a bird, anything other than the entity from John's story. Yet, doubt burrows deep. The rest of the night is a blur. We sleep in shifts, fitful and disturbed by vivid nightmares. The forest seems to close in, every creak of wood and hoot of an owl morphing into whispers and chilling laughter. The morning dawns, cold and heavy. The birds are silent, adding to the eerie stillness that envelopes our campsite. We pack up our gear, movement stiff and tense. Each of us is waiting for the first crack in our fragile composure. The first whisper comes as a subtle breeze, rustling the leaves around us. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispers, her eyes wide with alarm. The breeze picks up, whipping the trees and turning their gentle sway into a frenzied dance. The rustling grows louder, closer, until it's an insidious chorus of unseen voices surrounding us. Panic erupts. "We need to get out of here," Mark yells, his usual calm demeanor shattered. "Which way?" John's voice is sharp with rising hysteria. We swivel our heads frantically, the forest seeming to distort and writhe around us. The whispers become mocking laughter, echoing from every direction. There is no escape. As quickly as it started, the eerie cacophony dies down, leaving us trembling and disoriented. Each of us stares accusingly at the others. Who's cracking under pressure? Is this a cruel joke? Or is it a test from the unseen force haunting these woods? We are lost, not just physically but mentally. Cracks appear in our once united front. Sarah sobs uncontrollably, her optimism shattered. John paces, his nervous energy finally breaking through his composed facade. Mark's logical mind struggles to grasp the impossible, and I feel a chilling numbness settling over me. We're not playing an escape game anymore. We're prey in a hunter's den. Morning offers no respite. We stumble through the undergrowth, driven by blind panic, and a sliver of hope will break free from this verdant prison. The forest, thick with ancient trees and tangled vines, is a maze, seemingly shifting around us with each step. I glance behind, fear coiling in my gut that with each blink of an eye, one of us will simply vanish. Exhaustion sets in, and with it comes desperation. A small clearing offers a chance for respite, and we collapse to assess the damage. And there it is, the first tangible proof that we're unraveling. John's compass is missing, likely lost during our frantic escape from the whispering wind. Paranoia takes root. "Someone took it?" Sarah hisses, eyes darting between us. "Who wants to sabotage us?" "Don't be ridiculous." Mark's voice is sharp, masking his own underlying fear. "It probably fell out." Arguments erupt, fueled by exhaustion and the gnawing terror. Even my calm, rational Mark isn't immune, his voice cracking as he accuses John of carelessness. The compass is a symbol of our lost control, and the accusations tear gaping holes in our already faltering unity. As the light begins to fade, we desperately seek a campsite. I stumble onto something hard, a bone. Cold fear prickles my spine. It's long, slender, not an animal I recognize. The sight triggers a visceral terror, a primal instinct that screams at us to run. But run where? The feeling of being watched intensifies, a suffocating presence that clings to us like a shroud. Sleep is a fitful nightmare. I jolt awake, the air thick with Sarah's choked sobs. "I saw it," she whispers, her eyes wild in the dwindling firelight. A shadow in the trees, too tall, too wrong. It could be dismissed as delirium, yet her terror is contagious. Forcing myself to be the voice of reason, I examine the edge of the clearing. But even my rational mind is shaken by the sight of what look like deep scratches clawed into a tree trunk. They're too high, too deliberate to be any animal I understand. The next day is a blur of panicked movement and escalating conflicts. We walk in circles, unable to find any trace of our initial trail. John insists we head uphill. Sarah demands we follow a barely there deer track, while Mark simply sits in silent defeat. The forest is a vast green mirror, reflecting the chaos fracturing our minds. It is me who succumbs first. Each tree watches with twisted branches like gnarled hands. Every rustle of leaves is a monstrous threat. My breath comes in ragged gasps as unseen claws seem to tear at my sanity. The fear becomes a living thing, cold sweat, the relentless pounding of my heart, and a bone-deep certainty that the forest means to consume us whole. When the others finally notice my state, there's no compassion, only a reflection of their own fears. Mark stares with a strange curiosity, perhaps seeking a confirmation that none of us are immune to this invisible breakdown. John's face is a mask of frustrated anger, while Sarah edges away, a flicker of contempt in her eyes. I've become a liability, the first crack that might shatter them all. We're lost, not just physically, but shattered and delirious. Our attempts to backtrack reveal only more of the forest's unsettling trickery. Landmarks shift, and the sun seems to dance in the sky, disorienting us further. Exhaustion breeds monstrous hallucinations. I swear I see faces carved into tree trunks, their eyes hollow and filled with a terrifying hunger. Then, as if a cruel joke, there's a break in the trees. Hope surges, and immediately dies. It's our campsite from the first night. We stumbled in a vast circle, the forest dragging us back to the scene of our initial terror. Despair hits me like a physical blow. There is no escape. The once comforting clearing is now a haunting reminder of our failure. As dusk settles, John, driven past his breaking point, snaps. He shouts accusations wildly, blaming Sarah's optimism for bringing this curse upon us. Mark, cold and distant, coldly states we should split up to increase our chances. Sarah collapses into inconsolable sobs. With our group in tatters, I go numb. We wander off separately, not in search of rescue, but a corner of this verdant hell to die alone in. Stumbling through the dense undergrowth, I lose my footing and tumble down an embankment. Pain flares in my ankle. I'm trapped at the base of a small ravine, the towering trees above blotting out the fading light. I'm alone, injured, and utterly helpless. Then, I see it. A flicker of movement in the encroaching darkness. I strain my eyes but can't discern a shape. It's close, though. So close I can smell the damp musk and decay clinging to its presence. Something brushes my leg. Hair, fur. Its touch is shockingly cold, inhuman. I freeze, too terrified to scream. A guttural growl, low and menacing, reverberates through the ravine. Whatever it is, it's circling closer. Panic claws at me. Dragging my injured ankle, I scramble up the muddy embankment, but my escape is painfully slow. It's gaining, its footfalls heavy thuds against the earth. With a surge of adrenaline, I burst back into the clearing. To my horror, Sarah is there, huddled against the dying campfire. "Run!" I scream. "Something's—" The words die in my throat. A towering form steps out of the shadows. Its silhouette shimmers and distorts against the firelight. Impossibly tall, limbs impossibly long. But what freezes the blood in my veins are its eyes, glowing pinpoints of crimson malevolence in the shifting darkness. As it moves, a low moan vibrates through the air, a sound that carries the promise of unspeakable agony. Sarah finally sees it and she screams. But her scream is cut short as the creature lunges, blurring into a streak of darkness and claws. There's a sickening thud, a spray of crimson droplets against the fire, and then only whimpers that quickly fade into silence. I don't need to see any more to know Sarah is gone. I run blindly, the creature's footsteps pounding behind me. It's not a chase, it's playing with its prey, savoring the hunt. John bursts from the tree line, his face a mask of horror. His voice cracks as he mouths a single word. "Mark." Behind him, the forest is a writhing wall of shadow. We flee together, the shared terror a meager fuel that propels us forward. The forest is alive with the creature's relentless pursuit. John and I are fueled by blind, desperate terror. We crash through thickets, thorns ripping at our skin, stumble over roots, the pounding of our hearts mirroring the creature's echoing footsteps. Stumbling into a clearing seemingly untouched by the forest's darkness, we collapse. A sliver of hope, a weathered signpost points towards an unseen road. But any relief evaporates with chilling speed. The signpost is festooned with gruesome offerings, scraps of torn clothing, feathers matted with blood, and a crude drawing of a monstrous shape with crimson eyes. The offerings are a twisted message, a horrifying realization. We are not the first victims. Locals know. They've tried to appease, to warn, but the warnings reached us too late. Desperation gives way to a horrifying decision. I remember the forgotten supplies in my backpack: granola bars, a pocket knife, Sarah's too bright scarf. We arranged them beneath the sign, pathetic tokens to try and lure the creature away from the road, away from any other wanderer who dares enter the trees. We don't speak, simply lock eyes. A grim acceptance passes between us. This may be our only chance. Time loses meaning. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sends us scrambling. We stumble onwards, driven by the knowledge that stopping means death. A flicker of movement ahead, not the creature, but a figure. Disheveled, streaked with dirt, but unmistakably human. It's Mark. He survived, yet the madness in his eyes speaks of horrors witnessed, of a sanity clinging by a thread. Before we can speak, it comes. The creature emerges from the shadows, its crimson eyes blazing. Mark, already broken, offers no resistance. Claws flash, and his scream is a ragged cry that echoes through the trees as he's dragged into the darkness. John and I run. Tears stream down my face, blinding me as much as the forest's embrace. The creature delights in the chase. It's close, so close I can hear its rasping breath, smell the rotting stench of its presence. Ahead, there's a break in the trees. The road! We burst out, momentum carrying us onto the cracked asphalt. Exhaustion buckles my legs, but I force myself forward. John is just a step behind. A guttural shriek pierces the air, a sound of rage and hunger. We turn. The creature stands at the forest's edge. It hesitates, a flicker of something like confusion in its crimson eyes. Then, It melts back into the shadows, consumed by its monstrous domain. Safety is a mirage. Cars pass by, indifferent to our tattered forms. We flag one down, and the driver stares at us in a mix of pity and revulsion. The city is a lifetime away. We are broken, haunted by the unknowable horror that lurks in the heart of the woods. The city feels alien, its cacophony crushing after the deathly silence of the forest. News reports surface: missing hikers, bodies never recovered. John checks himself into a psychiatric ward, muttering about crimson eyes and unending darkness. I walk the streets, forever glancing over my shoulder, haunted by the feeling that I'm being watched. The forest didn't just take my friends, it took a piece of my soul. The nightmares never fade, a monstrous lullaby echoing in my mind. The woods are a scar on my psyche, a reminder that the true horror lies not in the dark, but in the unknowable that lurks within, and that some shadows stretch far longer than others.